The Early Learning Committee on which you serve recently held a work session on the family assessment response you were involved in last year. What's been the results of that?
Well, actually, it just was put into play January 1st this year, but our first work session in the Early Learning Committee, we heard from some of the caseworkers and social workers who are working with the pilot program for the family assessment response, and they are just absolutely gaga over this new policy, and it was just really thrilling for Representative Kagi and myself to really hear from them, some of their testimonials about how ramped up the caseworkers and social workers really are. This gives them the ability to do the jobs that they were trained to do and get in there and really make some reasonable and thoughtful assessment about what's going on with that family that's been referred to the department or the Child Protective Services or what have you. They can go into that household, assess the problem. Maybe it's something just as simple as mom's going through depression and needs to have somebody come in and clean the house so that she can get back up on her feet. And I mean, it could be something as simple as that. It doesn't always necessarily entail going in and removing the child from the custody of those parents. It really is going in and trying to assess what's going on in that family and how can we actually help them.
This year's session is just 60 days. Why is that?
Well, it's the supplemental budget year. And I think that what happens in the supplemental budget year, which also coincides with an election year for all of the House members, is a lot of people want to pass bills that send a message. And they don't necessarily and probably realistically don't have a chance to get through the entire process. But it's a way to kind of get your foot in the door and to be able to possibly discuss whatever the subject of that bill is in the interim. And then maybe come back during the budget session, which will be next year, which is the 105-day session, to potentially reintroduce that legislation and have a little bit more feedback about the potential for success for that.
The Supreme Court has said the legislature isn't doing enough to fund education and inferred the legislature do more this year. How does that impact this year's session and the supplemental budget?
You know, I guess I would just say that we all want to do what we can, do our best for education. Education is the great equalizer, and education is the paramount duty of this state. I don't think any legislator that you would talk to here wouldn't like to do as much as we possibly can. I'm not sure throwing more funding towards our K-12 system is really the answer. But that being said, through the McCleary decision, the court decision, and now this new Supreme Court decision that was made, I think we have done our due diligence in trying to make an attempt to try to make sure that we are adequately funding our educational system. We put almost $1 billion more in last year. I suspect we'll be doing the same thing this year. I also have some trepidation about the fact that the Supreme Court is rendering decisions that frankly should be rendered within the legislative branch of government and not the judicial branch of government. That being said, I don't think anybody objects to funding education adequately, but there is a question of separation of powers between those branches of government. And I don't think you'll see a lot of legislators going over and trying to make decisions on law cases that are before the Supreme Court. So we take a little bit of offense in the fact that the Supreme Court has rendered this decision and kind of tied our hands. So we'll see how we react to that this year.
You represent a great deal of Hispanics and other minority populations. There are several proposals in Olympia which would impact them directly. How do you weigh these bills based on the people you represent?
Well, just like I weigh any bill, I look at how reasonable it is. I look if it's good policy. I look to see if there's any unintended consequences from that legislation, and then I vote accordingly. I often, get good input from my constituents who help make me more aware of some of perhaps those unintended consequences to which I refer. I think I do a pretty doggone good job representing all of my constituents. And yes, I do have a large Hispanic population in my district. I had great students who came to me advocating on behalf of the DREAM Act, and I thought that it was reasonable. So I voted in favor of that, much to the chagrin of some of my constituents who don't believe that illegal immigrants should be able to acquire those types of benefits through the government. But this bill assures that they do try to get their citizenship established Frankly, the INS on the federal level has done a terrible job in processing those applications. And frankly, these are kids who, by no fault of their own, are here in the country illegally. Their parents brought them here at an early age. Many of them were raised with our own children in our communities. And to tell a child coming out of high school that they're not able to go on to college or have the resources that they need in order to do that. Many of these families, this is their first opportunity to achieve higher education in that whole family. And I just think in many cases, we have to be very careful about how we fashion legislation. But I also think that some things that are reasonable, I'm very much in favor of. Now, there was another bill today kind of pertaining to minority representation. It's the Voting Rights Act. And I had great trepidation and frankly voted no on that bill because I really thought that what we were trying to do was almost reverse discrimination, trying to gerrymandering districts in order to try to get a voice for the Hispanic population. They've got a good voice. They've got a good voice in me. I represent their interests over here, and I do a darn good job at it. And so to me, when we go overboard in that direction and try to grant special privileges to certain classes of individuals, I think then we're going down a very slippery slope, and we need to be very careful about that.